Okay, we're going to start off this measurement unit with a quick review of our rounding techniques as well as substitution and formula manipulation, which are going to be the most prevalent things in this unit. So remembering that anytime that we're rounding, in order to do it correctly, we can round to the ones, the tenths, the hundredths, the thousands, or the tens, the hundreds, the thousands, even potentially the millions. And remember that if I was to round to the hundreds, then I'm only going to look at what comes directly after that. Anything else does not matter in terms of my rounding techniques. So if I'm going to the ones or the nearest whole numbers, then it doesn't matter what comes after. So if I have the ones here, then right after the ones is the tenths. What comes after that, even if it's 9, does not matter. Pretend that it just does not exist. If it is a 4 or less, it's going to round down. If it is a 5 or higher, this still doesn't matter. It's just going to be what comes directly after that. And in this case, it's going to round up. So if it makes it easier for you, you can just cross out anything that comes after that point. Same thing. If I am rounding to the nearest 10, then I start at the tens place, and then the ones come after that. This is less than 5, so it's going to round down to a 0. If it is greater than 5, it's going to round up, so my tens is going to change, but my last number is still going to be a 0. Same thing if I'm going to the hundreds, same thing if I was going to the thousands. Look one placement after or to the right of whatever you're rounding to, and that's going to help you define it. Most people don't have a problem with this, but it's the same thing if I'm going to the 10th or the 100th. If I'm going to the 10th, then just look at the hundredths place and ignore anything after that. If I'm going to the 100th, then look at the thousandth place and ignore anything after that. Which means that if I'm filling in this table, for this number, if I'm rounding to the nearest one, well, the 1 is an 8. After the 8 comes a 5, so it's going to round up to 539. If I'm doing it to the tens, the 10 is a 3. After that becomes an 8, so it's going to round up to 540. If I'm doing it to the 100, then the 100 is going to be a 5. After that comes a 3, so it's going to round down to 500. If I go to the nearest tenth, then after the 10th, the 100th is a 9, so it's going to round up, and it's going to be 538.6. If I do the 100th, then after the 100th is a 6, so that's going to round up, and the 9 is actually going to round up to a 10, so that would be 538.60. First decimal place is the same as the 10th, 538.6, and second decimal place is the same as the 100th, 538.60. If I'm doing a much bigger number, the process is still the same. This would be 10,965. It's going to round up. This is going to be 10,900, and if it's 64, it's going to round down to 60. This is going to round up. The 900 is going to round up to 1000 or 1000, so it'd just be 11,000. So the 10th is going to be 10964.9, which is the same as the first decimal place. 0964.9, and the 100th is going to be 10964.89, which is the same as the second decimal place. You can use your graphing calculator to adjust this. When you're doing it, under the float section, it's saying how many decimal places would you like to go to? Which means that if you did a float of 2, it would mean that you're going to go to the 2 decimal places or to the hundredth. You can also use the rounding feature on your calculator, which is under the math. Then you got to press the right arrow to go to the number, and then it's going to be number 2, which is going to round to whatever you want it to do. And then you just have to do comma and put in the decimal place for how many decimal places you want to go. So if I am doing these to 3 decimal places, then it's going to be 10.622. If this is going to be to the nearest hundredth or 2 decimal places, then it's going to be 15.38. If I'm putting in this division and I want it to the nearest tenth, then that's going to be 22.2. And this multiplication to the nearest hundredth or second decimal place is going to be 9.13. We've already looked at this in our exponents unit, but for scientific notation, it works the same way. Where for our scientific notation, we typically go to either 1 or 2 decimal places depending on what it is we're requiring, and then we say we're going to multiply that by 10 to the power of, and then how many decimal places I need to move it, whether it's moving to the left or moving to the right. So the first one, if I'm doing it in scientific notation of the nearest tenth, then it would be 7.53, would just round to 7.5 times 10 to the power of, I had to move it over 7 decimal places. In this case, it's going to be 3.89, which would be 3.9 when I round it, and I had to move it over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 decimal places. So times 10 to the power of, because I'm moving the decimal to the right, -5. For example 4, I can do the same thing. I'm going to multiply it out and then move the decimal, and I'm going to say that this is going to be 2.2 times 10 to the -3. B is going to give me 1.7 times 10 to the power of 8. And C is going to give me 2.7 times 10 to the power of 3. We already know this from our last unit, but, sorry, not our last unit, our second last unit, when we were doing the systems of equations. But when we are substituting, we always need to make sure that we are using brackets to substitute a number. So if I have x is 2 and y is -3, then I'm going to say that this is -3 squared in brackets minus 7 times bracket 2 minus 3. This would be the same as 9 minus 14 minus 3, or -8. In the second case, I'm going to say it's going to be 9 bracket 2 squared minus bracket -3 plus bracket -3 to the power of 3. This would be the same as 9 times 4 plus 3, and then -3 squared is going to be minus 27, or 36 plus 3 minus 27. This is going to give me 12. Your graphing calculator can do substitutions for you if you're putting in the letters, but for the most part, just get in the habit of doing the brackets, because it is going to get overly complex if you're trying to do that for substitutions, especially because sometimes there's going to be multiple lengths and multiple widths. But if you want to take a look at it, there's the process.